All right, we are live. So I'm gonna go ahead and share it out on my thingamabobber.
Okay.
All right, we are ready to rock. So, as people are joining in a few minutes, we'll take about a minute, then we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll dive right in.
Sounds good.
All right. And if we have, I don't know if people are going to ask questions. I'll try to monitor it as best I can and see what we have. But I'll be recording this on YouTube as well. We can share it out as needed. And just as you want me to go through the slides, I'll just move them forward as you direct.
Sounds good.
All right. So first off, welcome whoever's listening to all of you who are joining. I have with me Dr. Cherie Dawson-Edwards. I'm thankful for her. I'm going to let her introduce herself. My name is Damian Thompson. I'm pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church. With all the things that are going on in and around our community, especially in Louisville and abroad, we've been trying to do education sessions about everything from racial tension and history of slavery. And now we're talking about criminal justice reform, specifically the movement to defund the police and what that means, and trying to unpack that suitcase. For whatever reason, that terminology gets people really upset, and I just kind of want to get to the truth of it. And in order to get to the truth of things, you got to bring in experts. So I'm lucky that my friend is an expert, and so I brought her in. I'm glad that she's here. So Cherie, go ahead and introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Okay. So, like you said, I'm Cherie Dawson-Edwards. I am a criminal justice professor at the University of Louisville. I also chair the Department of Criminal Justice, and I direct our social change minor. What I teach and research usually centers around racial disparities in the justice system, specifically related to juvenile justice, in school discipline, and the whole concept of the school to prison pipeline. And I want to apologize. I am on campus in my office, and like UPS airplanes fly over me like every 5 minutes. So it's better than being at home with my 5-year-old. But at any rate, just I teach our restorative justice classes, our social justice classes. I even teach our criminal justice admin class. And so this moment, as it relates to my academic background, is kind of my moment as an academic. And so, hopefully what we talk about today, people understand that there are multiple ways in which that we can look at this issue, and some ownership over language that I'm going to argue people leave alone, based on some of the complaints that I've seen just via social media and just everywhere. And so I hope we just can have a candid conversation about what defund the police could look like, what criminal justice reform has looked like, what abolition means as well, because for some reason these terms are triggering for people, and they're scary for people, and transformation is scary. I'm sure the caterpillar transforming into a butterfly that doesn't know what's going on is scared. So I'm happy to be here to talk about these things.
Good deal. So let's go ahead and dive right in, man. We got a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that you have adequate time to teach us. I'm here to learn as well, because these are things that I've heard you speak on already, but I wasn't shocked. But it's interesting to see the responses that people have had over the concept of defunding of the police. And let's just start there. This doesn't seem to be a new thing to you, but seems to be mainstream new. So kind of give us some history behind some of the logics behind that concept of defunding the police. Let's start there.
So I would start this story, and I'll just start the story where I begin. and I want to say the copyright date is 2003, but Angela Davis wrote a book called Are Prisons Obsolete? And she's for a long time been a prison abolitionist. What people don't understand is that prison abolition includes the carceral state. And the carceral state includes law enforcement. It's a collective group of law enforcement, courts, prisons, security, private, even the military is part of what is defined as the carceral state. And so prison, police abolition, defund the police are all part of that concept. And I've been teaching about that for almost 20 years. And so it's not a new concept. When you start to get into the terminology of divesting from and defunding, I first started using that terminology around the genesis of the movement for Black Lives and their strategies for improving. What one of them was to divest from the police and reinvest in the community. And so I've been teaching with that language. And if you want to go to the next slide, I think people can see the bigger picture of what I'm talking about. I've been teaching with that type of language since about 2014 or 15. Okay. And so what you see on the screen is an infographic that I've used for a couple of years in my class. I got it off of the Vera Institute, which is like a national think tank about different policy issues. And they were doing a campaign, I believe it was 2016, on rethinking or reimagining prison. And this campaign included all of these things. So if people take a minute and look at what is on here, it's not just the police, but it's talking about schools. It's talking about looking at other countries and how they are doing things. Invest in people, not prisons. Prisons, they're not the only solution. And so when we think about what that means to even law enforcement and policing, I think this is where people struggle. And this struggle is not new to me, because when I was advocating for restorative practices at our school system, I got resistance. And it's because if you think this is the only tool you have, when you feel threatened that someone's removing the only tool you really know and understand, then that's scary. And so it's the same kind of response I think that we're getting now, is that we've always had the police, and this is what the police do. This is what policing is in America. And what would our world look like with additional or transformed tools to respond to incidences or to make our communities safer?
Right. So, a lot of people hear defund the police as an anti-police campaign. But it doesn't seem to at all be that. It's actually an effort to make the community safer, just in a different way. Mm-hmm. So why do you think there's such pushback against the concept?
Well, I think there's multiple reasons. I think the gut pushback is that to defund something means it's no longer there. And so the people who think very black and white, either we have police or we don't have police. If we don't have police, then who keeps us safe? Who enforces crime? Who crime laws? Who does these things if we don't have that? And I get that response, because it's not everybody's job to understand the justice system like I may understand it, or like my students might understand it, or like organizers and policy strategists might understand it. And so the general public receiving this language without necessarily understanding how the alternative works is a scary thing. And then you get the terms divest and defund convoluted with abolish, right? Now, I would argue, and other people could see it differently, that defund and divesting are part of an abolitionist strategy. Okay. Meaning that people who generally support that generally support a new way of community safety. And does that mean that the police, or that there can't be any form of law enforcement? That does not mean that. It means that as we look at our current practice of American policing, is it working? Right. I mean, is it? Like, I'm not asking you, but I guess I'm asking people to ponder that. Is it working? Like, did the get tough on crime, lock them up, throw away the key, make us safer in the 80s and 90s? Did the drug war work? Those things didn't work. And so I think we've got to accept, as much as, I mean, I teach police officers. I have, one of my favorite students of all time is a police officer. He's an LMPD officer. I text him all the time to be safe out there. I'm not anti-police. I want something to work. And our current state of policing is not working. And I don't know how anybody could argue that it could be. So what I would say is that the response people are most comfortable with, not all people, but a lot of people, mainstream people, are often they're comfortable with reform strategies, because that means you're not getting rid of the police, you're reforming them.
Right.
And I'd like to push back on that too, because has reform worked? And I think it might be the next slide. What's the next slide that talks about reform? Okay. And so there is a difference between reformist strategies and abolitionist strategies. And I'm not here to advocate for either one. I am I'm a professor, so I'm here to educate. In educating, I have to ask people to think about questions. It doesn't mean one way or the other what I am. In this hat, wearing this hat, I'm an educator. If I was wearing my mom hat, I might say something different. But right now, I am totally in education mode. So people would argue that reform strategies are comfortable because they still allow us to center the police. And if you're centering American policing, you are centering what they've always been. And we all know where American policing came from, right? Slave patrols, town watches. They just transformed those into police departments. We all know that there is a history of American police being complicit with white supremacist groups. We know that, we all know that it took a long time for Black officers to even be a thing. And when they became a thing, they had to police Black communities. We all know that white officers still routinely mistake an undercover Black police officer, as somebody who's doing something wrong, and I don't want to say routinely, but we know that happens, right? And so we know that American policing has centered whiteness because that's what it was created to do, right? And so if we're looking at reform strategies and we're saying, oh, let's just reform and let's provide more training and let's increase their capacity or scale them up. We've kind of been doing that. We've been doing that a lot. You can look at city budgets. You can look at our city budget. There's a lot of money in policing for this city. And again, are we safer? Are we safer? Maybe we feel safer because we've been taught that police make the community safe. Many people don't feel safer with more police. So that's what reform is. So if you look at this slide, it's actually one big slide. I cut it up so we can talk about reform versus abolition. And these listed here, and I know it's tiny, and I'm happy to provide references for people to see the bigger things. But reform strategies say we need body cameras for accountability.
Right.
Body cameras cost money. Community policing, we need community policing. More training. And I'm not one to totally knock training and education as an educator who also has a training institute in my university. So I have mixed feelings about the training. I have feelings about investing more money in the training coffers as opposed to using that money for better training. So I think that for me is a little bit debatable. The civilian review and oversight boards are a reformist strategy. So those are examples of reforms that we've already seen. And again, I asked the question, have these reforms made us safer? Community policing has been out for a long time. So to have that as something that people still talk about as the tool for improving police, has that worked?
Let's talk about that for a second. When we say community policing, what are we saying, and what's the problem or issue with it? Why doesn't it work?
So, I mean, there's lots of ways to think about community policing. One of the earlier ways to think about it is that technology kind of built a wall between the police and the community. So when police officers first started patrolling in cars, so like before we had cars, there were police and they were on horses or walking. And so the idea of, getting the police in the community. And so what you saw as community policing became a thing decades ago is that you saw precinct, stations placed in communities. You saw police, they wanted the police to be part of the community fabric so that there would be trust between the police and the community. And I'm not going to say that doesn't exist. That there aren't police officers that have relationships with community members that they trust. I believe that there is an element of that in modern day policing. Will policing ever? Here's the problem. You can't say we have community policing, but you also have tanks and you have military equipment, right? And so those two things don't go together. And so if you are a community-oriented police department, you also don't have armored vehicles at the Pride Parade. I got a notification last week, or I guess earlier this week, from last year's Pride Parade, and I took my daughter down there. She was 4, and we were walking with an organization that I'm part of, and I took a picture because behind us in the staging area were police officers that looked like they were going to war. And my daughter's playing with chalk in Nulu, and there's these police officers, the imagery there, like, why did you need that at the Pride Parade? Like, seriously? But then down the street, you had a police car, LMPD car decorated with rainbows. Like, you can't say you're both of those things.
Right. And that was my struggle with the situation that happened at the Dinos. My major issue, and, we can probably argue and litigate what happened, what should have happened. My major issue is that whoever made the decision to send the guard and all those people down to 26 and Broadway, they couldn't have been from Louisville. Mm-hmm. They couldn't have lived here anytime or have an awareness of the community. Otherwise, they would have never seen that as a protest or a gathering spot. They would have known that that's how they get down every Sunday night. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
It reminded me, because I am from Louisville, it reminded me of my teenage and college years at 7th and Broadway at White Castles. I mean, that's what we did. We went, we hung out, and I'm not going to lie and say I haven't been to Club Cedar around the corner, and I've seen people hang out on the weekend. And so you're right. Like, there is some recognition or some lack of recognition of what's normal versus what is a looter riot protest. And, that's problematic for sure.
Definitely. So you're not saying that any of these reformists are bad things. You just think that they've shown in history to not be effective in what you hope they do. In reducing overly violent or overly aggressive policing or reducing the crime in the area. None of these strategies have shown from the data that they're actually working. Is that true?
I think folks are arguing that communities are not safer because of these things. And let's just talk about body cameras, because body cameras, as an educator and researcher, I know that people are really just now putting out research on the effectiveness of body cameras. Like, they're still doing research on that. And so they haven't been prominent enough in policing, I think, for us to really know whether they're going to have an impact or not. But what I do know is that community members who thought that they would, as a reform strategy, get really upset when there's no body camera footage. Like, why isn't that? Why isn't there body camera footage? And why do some police why do they not have to wear them when they, it seems like when we need it the most, those are the ones that don't have to wear them. And so there's implementation. So even if body cameras would make a difference, there's an implementation issue in how they're used. And so you can't just say, oh, we all have body cameras. But if they're not used effectively, then is it a strategy that is helping?
Yeah, it's like the life insurance that you didn't buy, but I had the brochure. Yeah. All right. So let's transition. So if that's one model, let's move to the abolitionist steps, and kind of talk about what are some of the principles there and how it can be or should be effective.
So yeah, and I'll go back to Angela Davis. So she was here, I think it was 2016. Yes, she was here a week after Donald Trump was elected. And she was here on campus, and I got to spend some time with her, which, yay, I was super excited. When people were like, who would you want to sit down and talk to? And I'm always like, Angela Davis. Oh, wait, I've done that. So I was hyped. I'm still hyped 4 years later. But in her talk, she was talking about reimagining security. And that was a term that I felt like people could kind of get on, because that even includes like school discipline and things like that. It doesn't just mean prisons or the carceral state, even though some people would argue that schools are part of the carceral. I would argue that they're part of the definition of carceral state. And so when you think about abolition, it's the whole, to me, and this is how I would explain it to my students, is if you have a bucket and you have a leaky bucket and you keep plugging the leaks, and then another leak springs, and another leak springs, and then you continue to lose the water, do you keep that bucket or do you try to find a new bucket? Like, I would want a new bucket. I think about a car. If I can afford a new car, instead of having to keep putting money into a car that's costing me more money than it's worth, which I know, unfortunately, lots of Americans have to do that, would they prefer to just get one that doesn't have a problem?
Right.
Absolutely. And so abolition is saying this bucket, we can plug it with body cameras, we can plug it with this, we can plug it with that, but it's still leaking. And so abolition would call for developing, based on what the community identifies their needs are, developing alternatives where we invest funds into the community to provide safety in the community. And I know that is a difficult thing for people to think about. So when I start talking about this in for instance, my social justice class, I show a video, and I can't remember the woman's name, but it says, what would a world without prisons look like? And her idea is restorative justice centers, where if you think about like the Louisville Urban League and their 4 tenants, where they care about housing and education and a center that provides resources and experts on those things, could that impact community safety in a positive way, or could it impact community violence in a reductionist way? And so when you think about alternatives, those are the kind of things that people are talking about. And so abolitionist strategies include reducing police funding and reinvesting them into the actual community needs. It also kind of counters the reform thing, where it rejects or always challenges that police increase safety. Like reformist strategies assume police increase safety. Like, that is the premise. We can't get rid of them because they increase our safety. Abolitionist strategies challenge that, which is why I keep saying, is it really working? Are we really safer? Do people feel safer, or are they really safer? And so those are the kind of questions an abolitionist strategy would look like, or would ask. The other thing I would say about defunding as an abolitionist strategy is not that tomorrow let's just pull the plug on all of the police funding. That is not what they mean. Right. Of course, I have seen people on social media, including police officers, assume that's what it means. And I really want to encourage people. There are tools, there are resources, there are TED Talks. This is not a new strategy. Do not let someone who just learned the terminology yesterday define it for you. Do not let your news stations, who have never said defund the police ever until 3 weeks ago, do not let them, the anchors on your favorite cable news station, don't let them define it for you. Like, there are experts out there, and I'm not even, I know you called me one, I'm not even claiming to be one, but there are people out there that have tools out there for you to learn things for yourself. And if you can watch cable, you can totally click on Google and find out what it really means.
It takes just a little time.
It's just a little tiny bit of time. But just some of the things that are on here on this particular slide are, and I can barely see it. At the bottom, you can see reduce the size of the police force, which is what people think of first. Like, why would you want to reduce it? And I want to talk about that just from the context of criminal justice education. So I've taught criminal justice for 18, almost 19 years in higher education. And I've
You
seen it.
struggled with saying that? You
Huh?
struggled a little bit. You struggled a
Yeah, I
little bit
did,
saying that
because I
years?
realized not that long ago that I'm like an old head in higher ed, and I don't feel old, but it's all good. Well, I do feel old, but not as far as my career is concerned. So reducing the size of the police force. I just recently saw where retired and some current LMPD had their rally the other day in Central Park. And the news stories that came out of that said that they could lose potentially 200 officers. I think it said that they currently have 1,100 officers. They're already down a lot. A lot of the conversations in police leadership that I've overheard, because I'm not police leadership, but I've overheard was the difficulties that the police are having with recruiting. And then you have the other side of the baby boomer officers retiring anyway. You were already going to get a reduction in the size of the police force. People who would argue for an abolitionist strategy says don't replace them. Replace them with community safety type of alternatives. And so it's not necessarily saying right now in this moment, fire half the police force. There are people out there that would say get rid of them tomorrow. But just because there are people that say that doesn't mean that everyone that supports divesting from the police believe that same exact line.
Right.
And so reducing the size of the police force is happening naturally anyway. And I can say that in my classes in recent years, I've had less and less students who want to be local type law enforcement. They all want to be the FBI. And I'm like, well, you kind of can't just graduate and go to the FBI. You kind of have to do local law enforcement first. But they all want to be federal law enforcement, but not as many want to be local. And I want to ask the police, why is that? I'm not going to just ask community, but ask the police departments, why is that? And one of the things that they will say is that they are being treated so poorly and badly that nobody wants, and they're being threatened, their safety, or they're always had their safety threatened. That's part of policing. But it's more dangerous because of the targeting of the police. And I would posit that there's not a lot of actual empirical evidence of this targeting that
I was going to ask you that.
They say. And that all came out when the Blue Lives Matter laws were coming out, because that was the platform. And I don't know, because I don't study Blue Lives Matter laws, but I'm just wondering, did that help or work, or was that rhetoric to feed the frenzy of the thought that police are being targeted by organizers in the community? And I remember a letter written by I don't know how many iterations ago of the FOP writing about our local Black Lives Matter organizer, and it was just a horrible, horrible letter that should have never come out, but that's how he felt, and he put it out there, and people supported that. Yeah. And if we're going to move forward in our community, then we can't have that. We just can't have that type of communication. And we've had in recent years, and we have still today.
Yeah. So let's talk about real action. Now, from an educator perspective, this is kind of the concept. Are these already in practice in cities across the nation? Can you give us some examples of where you've seen this in action, where it's actually working?
So I think that I don't really have any specific examples. I can refer back to Minneapolis. Okay. Actually, let me use Minneapolis for a minute. They have a report that I've mentioned. I may have mentioned on some of the TV interviews, or they may have cut that out. But they have a report on the 150-year, it's a performance assessment of the Minneapolis Police Department. And it's called Enough is Enough. And what they did in this really long report, I haven't read the whole thing, is they started asking questions and doing kind of community needs assessments and finding out what the community needs. And so I read in an article, I don't think I have it in front of me, that the city of Minneapolis had already decided to reinvest some of their money into community safety. And so the reason I want to bring Minneapolis up is because a lot of people see them as a blueprint of what people can do. So they fired the police officer that, killed George Floyd. They did those things in rapid succession. The University of Minnesota, scaled back their connections or relationships with the Minneapolis Police Department. And I'm not saying that we are not doing this work in Louisville, but I've not seen a comprehensive plan yet. And maybe there's one out there. And if there is one, please somebody send it to me. But I've not seen a comprehensive plan like this Minneapolis plan. And it's even in audiobook format. I was like, yeah, you don't have any excuse. You could be driving in the car, reading it, listening to it. Right. But it outlines a lot of, really good stuff that's based in data, and that data can be empirical, like the stats or whatever, but it's also from the community. So it's the voices of the community. It's anecdotal data. And I want to say this about anecdotal data, because I'm more of what we call a qualitative research. I care about voices. I care about giving people who are impacted agency. I care about them, not talking about them, not always talking with them, but listening to them. Because best believe I know what's best for my family better than you know what's best for my family, right? And so I don't need to listen to you tell me what I need to be doing for my family, right? And so it's kind of like that about communities. I know but I live here. I was raised here. My family's from here. I know what's best, as opposed to some police officer who doesn't even live in our city that comes in and polices this community. And so, I don't even know what question you asked because I went off on a tangent, but I just gotta get that in there, that we have to remember that piece.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, one of the efforts that I've been doing is I invited some of my white clergy brothers and sisters to meet me at Emmanuel in the Shawnee Neighborhood. We took a moment of silence, we talked together, and then we went on a walk through the Shawnee Neighborhood. And I think, in my mind, walking the real estate, letting your feet touch the soil, brings an identity to a place that some people feel like it's a faraway vacation spot. Right. Like, I've never been to the West End. It's not Cancun. It's not somewhere you buy a bed and breakfast at. It's actually a community.
But it could be.
It could be, yeah. I mean, I call it the beautiful Shawnee neighborhood, because what I wanted people to be able to understand and see is that you have people who have been in homes for hundreds of years, generation upon generation. You see manicured lawns, and people want the same things that people in Northern Commons and Glen Oaks and wherever want. That we are so much more common than we are different. And we just got to make sure that we understand the different walks that we're in. We're on different sides of town, but we're really the same people that want safe schools, want safe kids, want our kids taken care of, and opportunities and jobs and housing. All the stuff that everybody wants is really, really consistent. And, you don't have to have, 400 officers in a 1 mile radius at a place if you make this equal investment in West Louisville as you do in other parts of Louisville.
Very well said. We just had to interject that real quick.
Yeah.
It's part of the whole, divest argument is to reinvest and reallocate those resources into communities like that. And so, I'm glad you brought up this particular slide, and the citation or the source of it is at the bottom of it. But if you look at that, and I did not create this slide, this is just, this is educational purpose. It was educational for me because I don't even think I knew the percentage of the budget was that large. I knew it was big, but I couldn't have quoted the number. And so invest, divest. Louisville needs to divest from policing and corrections and invest in community resources and services like housing, education, health, transportation, food security, and jobs. And I just want to say that I know for a fact that there are resources out there that are showing what that could look like in Louisville. And I hope that those resources become public soon. But people have ideas about what it could look like to reinvest or invest. I don't even want to say reinvest in housing, because have we invested it? You can't redo something if you hadn't done it before. So
you can't see it on this budget right here.
Right. So investing in housing, and I would say reinvesting in education, because I know you've probably seen that meme where someone says, why is defund the police so triggering when defunding education wasn't a problem? Like, right. Yeah, everybody was okay with that. We know we've done that. And so reinvesting in education and healthcare and transportation. And, I know lots of people working on the concept of food insecurity and food deserts and jobs. So again, I'll go back to what the Urban League designed for, is these types of things. These are not new arguments or new alternatives. They're just this. I'm just really hopeful that the moment for this is now, because lots of people have been talking about this for a very, very long time. But that 38.3% of the recommended 2020 budget is the police.
Yeah. So
and
right over half, or right at half of all of the budget is going to either policing or holding the ones that you've policed. Yeah.
So I just want people to sit on that and go back to my challenge question of, if that is the case, if we're investing currently that much, is our current investment, I mean, I know I don't do a very good job with like portfolios and stocks, but for those of you who do, is your money that you're putting in the investment putting out what you expect for it to do? And I think people, like you said, in East Louisville or Northeast Louisville, they don't have to be policed like that, and they think it's working because they don't go into the heavily and over policed communities, because they have this idea of what it may look like, and so they may think that that's working. But that's why we need community voices. We need to give community folks agency, because the one thing that I think, and a reporter asked me the other day, why is this time different? Like, why are people that never cared caring? And I don't know, I'll throw that at you. Like, the only thing I could think of is that we are still, but very much went through a very scary collective survival mode with the pandemic. I mean, that's the only thing that I can think of, because I stopped looking at police murders of Black folks it was 2014 after Tamir Rice. I said, I don't need to see any more videos. This new video is not going to make me feel any different. I feel exactly the way I felt then, and a new video is not going to make me feel any different. So like, what is it that's making people feel so differently? I'm not knocking it. I'm happy.
Yeah.
I'm happy. I'm frustrated.
I don't know why this one hit differently. Like, I truly thought Tamir Rice was going. If Tamir Rice's death couldn't do it, I just couldn't conceptualize anyone ever being any more outraged. And just to be clear, this ain't in our notes.
Not at all.
The officer that murdered Tamir Rice never lost his job, never got pulled up on charges or any. He still to this day walk around kicking it, doing his thing, and that's mind blowing. And the outrage of it was minimal at best. And definitely the outrage wasn't across socioeconomic lines or racial lines or political lines. The outrage was really, really specific. But this one has hit differently. And, I'm gonna be honest, the number of phone calls, text messages, and extents of support that I've gotten in the past 4-5 weeks have been large.
Oh, I know. My husband gets them too. I don't get them. I'm like, oh, maybe my friend network's not as diverse as I thought.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're embarrassed, because I've been saying these things for years, and now you're just now listening. Now it's a harder pill to swallow when you know that you care about me personally and maybe not professionally until it became a thing for someone to care about. And so, you're not going to call me and say, I just want you to know, because I'm going to be like, I kind of been talking about this pretty much for all day, every day, forever. So
yeah, you following in style, girl. You in style now.
But my husband has gotten lots of phone calls and texts, and I'm not knocking folks for doing that. In fact, I'm like, cool, some folks that I wouldn't have necessarily thought would buy into the concept after one of the news interviews. They were like, your wife did a good job. She made it sound so like, doable. And I'm like, it is doable. We have to want to change things for things to change. And I think people just have a hard time with change. I know they do.
And it's kind of the argument, we have money for crisis, but what about money for prevention?
Right.
And I think if we make so many efforts to prevent some of the harm and the pain that has been caused communally, that if we make those investments up front, that it'll save us money in the long run. But for whatever reason, that just seems tough to fully understand. Let me ask you this question. You've been talking about this for years. This is not a new concept. Who needs to buy in for this actually to happen? Who are the individuals that, whoever's watching this, whoever hears about this, who do we need to pull the coat strings of, to talk in the ear of, in order for this to actually start moving to possible, to tangible?
So I know that there is a list of people that that we need to target in our community, and we know that there are some powerful people with influence in our community, and I think those people need to speak up, and they need to acknowledge that what's happening and what has happened has not worked. And so I would say, we need some influential people to speak up, but we also need people educated, just regular folks, so that they can take their awareness, and I don't want to say educated, but awareness, to the polls, and to their representatives, and to their council person, to their school board person. Like, the people have the power. I know the ACLU has had this movement called People Power, and we really believe in the power of the people. That's what's going to make change. And if you think about, just historical movements, it's been people that have made those things happen. Like, civil rights legislation just didn't happen. It took people and the will of the people. And I'm hoping right now we have the will to make things better and acknowledge, become more aware, and make some action toward that. So this slide actually comes from that Minneapolis PD 150 Enough is Enough report. And I just wanted to show it. The people can Google it. But it's 10 ideas for building a police-free future. And I was actually going to mention one of them. Number 3 on the list, and you kind of alluded to this a couple minutes ago. It says, build community all the time, not just in times of trouble.
Right.
And to me, that's it. Like, yes, this is a time of trouble. And I think for Louisville, it's hit home with Breonna Taylor and all the things that have happened there. It's closer. It's at home now. It's in our front and backyards. We can't escape it. And so while we certainly need to build community now, we should always be building community. We should always be uniting. And we know that we have a segregated city, it's still residentially segregated, and people stay in their places. And we've got to be a better community, and that means being more receptive to people that are different than us. And that goes both ways. Like I said, maybe my friend list isn't diverse enough for me to get the apology calls, and maybe I need to expand that. I don't know. I mean, even me in this moment, while none of these concepts are new, this moment is new. If someone asked me, like, what would you do if you could, in your position, what would you do to make things better? If money was an option, which it always is. And I was like, I don't know. I've never been forced to think that big. I mean, of course, I'm going to advocate at a smaller level for restorative justice and things like that. But like, what would it look like? What would an overhaul look like? And as a whole entire plan, that is something that we have to develop. And I'm not resistant to developing an alternative plan, because people are like, well, you're talking yourself out of a job. No, I'm not. I can still teach what justice looks like in the new format. I'm already kind of teaching it anyway.
Right. But like saying that's the hope. I say that at my church all the time. Like I'm the pastor, I'm the chief teacher. My hope is that I do my job so effectively that people no longer need me.
Mm-hmm.
Like that I've taught so well, that I'm inspired to study yourself, that you're so spiritually strong that when you need a prayer, you don't think to say, Rev, pray for me, that you feel mature and of yourself. And kind of that's the same concept. I think in the utopian world that we've created safe communities where everyone can walk down the street without fear of anything, right? That if you have a safe community, drugs go down and crime goes down. If the economy goes up, also the crime reduces, right? So I think that is proven, and we got to put our action where the reality is. But right now, I feel like we're fighting ghosts. Like there's a myth in our head, a ghost in our head, a boogeyman that's living on the West End, kind of patrolling, waiting to get you. And you got to keep the police there, otherwise the boogeyman will come back, right?
Yeah, but for some people, the police are the boogeyman.
Come on now.
I mean, for a lot of people. I mean, I had to, and I don't say this, very often. I say whatever in my classroom, just so you know. So I have whatever academic freedom to do that. But I'm going to step outside of Professor Dawson-Edwards and be mom, Cherie, the mom. I don't feel safe. I don't want my kid interacting with the police at all. I teach them. I try to teach them from that lens, but I don't. One day you called me. Remember that day you called me? I was out of town. You were like, I saw Cameron walking down Westport Road with a hoodie on. What?
Yeah. Right.
You can't be walking down Westport Road with a hoodie on. You can't do that, Yeah. And so, no, that freaked me out. And I called his dad. I think both of us were out of town, honestly.
Yeah.
My mom was there. I was like, Cameron's walking down Westport Road with a hoodie. I'm like, who has to live like that?
Yeah.
Like, even I live like that too. Like, people think that, oh, you're the ivory tower, you're blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you're right. I am. But at the end of the day, my kid with a hoodie on doesn't look any different than anybody else's kid. And so I do the work that I do, not just for my kid, but for everyone that looks like him. Because it won't matter how much education he has or how much education his mom has or what. None of that matters with an interaction like that. And we know that. And so we can't pretend like it is the same for everybody. So the police, in many of our minds, are the boogeyman. I don't want them pulling up behind me and asking me questions either.
Yeah. I'm loud and I'm a big guy. I tell Jamie, I'm always so uncomfortable because I've seen, just in a normal interaction, I've seen how differently people treat me when they don't know who I am compared to when they find out, especially in spaces where we're having maybe a community event and I'm there and I rarely am in a suit. So I'm just dressed regular, I guess you call it. I'll walk by, I'll speak to people and they'll look at me kind of crazy. And then they find out I'm the pastor and they're all up in my face. And I'm mindful that the changes in how they naturally saw me and the importance that I had once they figured out who I was, it makes me feel icky. You know what I mean? I want my default position to be safe,
Right. Exactly.
That Louisville knows. Now, if they go back to my Mississippi days, they might find out different. But that Louisville knows I ain't never been in a fight. I ain't never had a violent situation. I don't want them to go on my BC days. But to this state, I'm as safe as they come, but I don't want to be seen because of my size and because of my hue, to be seen as more threatening than somebody with whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you're right that you are. And for me, I'm trying to remember the last time I felt it happens so often. Like whether I'm shopping or whether I'm like why are you following me? You know, what are you doing? You know, and that's been happening all my life. Like it's like you're conditioned to expect that until someone acts like it's not a thing. And you're like, yeah, it really is still a thing. And I think that just our Blackness, regardless if it's the police or some other agent of the law, whether it's loss prevention or a Target. And I'm like, really? Like, I come to Target, not anymore, but I used to go to Target a whole lot. You know, I'm like, y'all have to know me at Target in Springhurst. Like, you have to know me. Like, I'm 6 feet tall. Like, there's not a whole bunch of people, Black women that look like me. So, but yeah, it's just our reality, and it's what we have to fight against. And we have to continue to do that. So I know we're running low on time, but just a couple of these other 10 action ideas. And I know that Louisville organizers and folks in Louisville have, you know, other ideas and things. But I want to bring up this one. It's number 2. It says, get trained in first aid, crisis de-escalation, restorative justice. And that's the community getting trained in that. And so we have more people who are trained in first aid and crisis de-escalation and restorative justice. You may be able to have this, what we call in criminology, informal social control. Police are formal social control agents. We're the informal social control agents. I mean, I never forget, one of my friends brought up, I was in DC a couple years ago for my birthday, and we were leaving like a restaurant, and there was this, he was probably like college age, 23-year-old Black male who was arguing with the police, and he was getting amped and amped and amped. And because I'm trained in restorative justice and I know the language to how to talk to people, I talked him down. He didn't know me, you know, and maybe I reminded him of his auntie or his mama. I don't know. But I talked him down, and he walked away. He was like, you're right, and walked away. That could have been a very bad incident. He was probably a little intoxicated. It was relatively late. And I was like, you don't need to do this. It's okay. And I was calm, and I talked him down. I intervened. I was a bystander who intervened. And so that there was no need for any police interaction anymore, because I was trained in the right way to I'm not even in DC as a community member, but I'm a Black woman. And if I see a Black male who could be my stepson, I'm going to do what I can to intervene, so he doesn't have to be in contact with the criminal justice system. And I think these kind of things are what keeps people from being in contact with the criminal justice system. And that's why we need to invest in them. We won't need the criminal justice system as much if we can keep our community safe with the correct tools. And then another one, this one's number 1. It's an easy one. It says, stop calling the police when it's clearly unnecessary.
Come on now.
So these aren't even money things. These are community things. And I remember telling someone who interviewed me recently, I said, I grew up thinking you called 911 for everything. I didn't. But I mean, that's what you did. You called 911, you know. And we can even see how in the last, 15 years or so, the police departments have gotten these alternative numbers. Don't call 911, call 811, or for non-emergency, call this, because we were so reliant on calling 911 if it was a cat in the tree. And yeah, I like animals too, but you don't need to call the police because the cat's in the tree, or you don't even need to call the fire department for that. And so we've seen all these cases where certain people, barbecue Becky's or whatever, are calling the police on us for nothing. But I think a lot of people are calling the police for things that are nothing. And we've seen that slowly chipped away. Well, let's chip away more at that. Stop using the police or weaponizing the police when there is a slight problem in your life, or your perception of threat that's not really there. Reassess your assessment of threat. And then with mental health crises, remember to center the person in the crisis. And so there's been a lot of talk you mental health advocates or crisis teams that are not armed law enforcement professionals. You invest in money for those folks. Same thing with, the houseless or homeless population. You need advocates, people who are trained to be able to respond to people in some kind of crisis. And then the last one, and there's 10 of them, and there's lots of other things we can think about, but I just want to give people some practical things to think about, what they can do. Dream bigger. There was a time before the police, and there will be a time after. And I want to say policing as we know it. There was a time before the police, not in people that look like me in this country, that not too much before that, but we can have a different model of safety that includes the community and gives them voice and agency and power to keep their community safe.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think what I'm seeing more of is an understanding that our communities are in mental distress, that there are many more people who need a hug and a conversation rather than handcuffs. And the phrase that ACLU use, and I've heard you use several times, people over prisons. And I think people matter. And I want both the Black Lives Matter folks and the All Lives Matter folks to allow that same tolerance, understanding, and willingness to accept for people that we've deemed as quote unquote criminals. I want their lives to matter too. Their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their fathers, and some of them are hurting. And I would like to help rather than hinder. But all right, our time is up. I don't want to hold you too long. I know you're there in your office.
Yeah, and it's hot because nobody's on campus, so they don't have air. Right? I was like, oh Lord, I got greasy, but it's okay.
Just being there glistening and a glistening. Well, I appreciate you, and this was really good stuff. If you're listening, look her up. She's at University of Louisville. Dr. Cherie Dawson-Edwards, and I am Damian Thompson. Thank y'all for joining today. Hopefully this helped. Take care.
Thank you.